Hello, and welcome to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the third Sunday after Pentecost for the week of June 29th, 2025, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig in this week's podcast. And before we get into this week's podcast, I have to get a few things kind of off my chest. And I don't know if you all have recognized, and there's been things that being on this side of the microphone, at times you try keeping a little distance. And this time I kind of have to be a little bit more raw with all of you before we really dig into this week's podcast. If you've been following the national news, the area that I live in got hit by what they're saying is the equivalent of a Category 3 land hurricane. They had straight line winds come through the area in which I live, Bemidji, Minnesota. And fortunately, my wife and we really didn't experience near the devastation that a lot of other places did. I ended up having family up that weekend. We were planning on doing a cool event that Bemidji was looking at hosting, and that got canceled, obviously. And we drove a little bit through town, and just the devastation, a lot of things. And this community in 2012 had a major blowdown, and our next door neighbor is a lineman, and the word that's coming out of this is just from their perspective, this is worse. And seeing some of the images of that, and then kind of some of the stuff that we absorbed, I can understand why they're saying that. It's been hard, and right now I'm in a different location than I normally am. I am watching from afar, and having gotten out of Bemidji for a couple different reasons, partially due to I'm speaking at Gustavus later tonight. And the hard thing is knowing that today is a very hot day as people are trying to do cleanup day 2. And there's another storm potentially coming that probably won't be as severe, but still severe thunderstorms with potential hail. The thing that I will just say at this point is thank goodness for places like the American Red Cross that is providing major support to the city for those who are needing it. And I'd also argue, make sure that they're in your prayers. And I think this is one of those things where two things. One, I think acknowledging that this is something that probably is becoming more and more of a reality because of stuff we have talked about for years now on this podcast with how the climate seems to be changing and evolving, partially probably due to us, and then the compounding effect on what that does. I think the other aspect to it is when people talk about being prepared for severe weather, making sure that you really go through and think through that stuff. The amount of time that power is going to be down and not serviceable in Bemidji is days for parts of the city, and that includes a lot of the grocery stores for just being able to get food. And so I think some of those types of things, that's one of the things being on this side of it and where I'm at, is make sure that you're taking some of that time to do that. As I stated, my wife and I were perfectly fine. There's a lot of churches today, some were able to have service, some weren't because of power. And so I'm just stating, with the type of severe storms that we are getting now throughout the world, because of how our changing climate is, I think at minimum, the thing that we can be doing is thinking about that stuff. But this is also an opportunity for us to really let our faith be shown and making sure that you're continuing to reach out to those different communities. I know yesterday I was able to help an elderly friend with some major cleanup in their yard as they had trees in their home. And I know when I get back later this week that it's going to continue to be, how do we continue to provide and come together as a community? And I think that's important, and I think it's something to remember and process as we are going through times like this. So let's just jump back into last week's question, which was, are we doing everything that God is calling us to do? And I think kind of tying into what I've kind of experienced here the last 48 hours, I think the biggest thing is making sure that we're working together and serving each other, taking care of each other, being willing and able to speak out when we are needing help. And I think in a certain way that allows others and ourselves to be called into the things that we are being called into doing in those times. And I think that's one of the things at times that it's easy for us to get a little bit prideful, and it's something I'm dealing with, and I don't want to bug other people. And I think there's times where we have to acknowledge that, no, that's what we need. And so we open up, we expand outward, and we talk to people. So let's just jump into it. One of the alternative Old Testament texts this week is out of 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, and 6 through 14. This is where you have Elijah and Elisha, and Elijah is going to be taken up into heaven, and Elisha is going to be taking over as the prophet. And there is multiple times that Elijah is kind of asking Elisha, just stay here. And no, I want to stay with you. I want to stay with you. As long as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will not leave you. And so it's this continuation. And so finally, Elijah asks Elisha, what are you wanting? And I want to inherit a double share of your spirit. This is hard, but what will happen as long as you watch me fully ascend, that's what will happen. And what happens? Boom. We have this moment where Elijah gets taken up to heaven, and we see this transfer of power as Elisha is able to strike the water and part backwards, just like Elijah had to get to the place that they had been, crossing the Jordan. So this idea and this transfer of power, but then also this desire to continue to be with them and understanding and being with God. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 77, verses 1 and 2, and 11 through 20. And this is a moment where we continue to cry out to God and recognizing that as we cry, we are looking for this God of old. And at times it's easy for us to look back and say, this is what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to go back to where I was. And yet we have to recognize that, no, we are being called forward. We are called to be new people. We are called to be the descendants and continue to move forward and recognize that God continues to walk with us as we move forward. The other alternative Old Testament text this week is out of 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 15 and 16 and 19 through 21. And this is the call story of Elijah. And this is that moment where Elijah is out plowing the fields, and at that moment then gets called and just basically abandons what he has been doing and picks up and follows and becomes that servant, recognizing that, yes, there's some things I need to return quickly to my father, but I'm moving forward within this calling on where I am being called into. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 16, all 11 verses of it. And this is a moment where we recognize that God be with us and protect us as we move into new things, as we are moving forward, recognizing that you're the one who provides, you're the one who counsels, you're the one who is able to help us be able to rejoice, and making our paths to where God is desiring is actually the fulfillment. So this whole recognition of, as we are moving forward, recognizing that it's God who is the one who is taking care. The second reading, or the epistle text this week, is out of Galatians chapter 5, verses 1 and 13 through 25. And this is where we are recognizing the freedom that we get with being within God, is recognizing the love that we should be having for each other and caring for each other, that we love one another, and that we don't get satisfied just then purely by the things of the flesh, and recognizing this list here in verses 19 and 20 of different things, even into 21, of things that are going to separate us, isolate us, things that will make us purely about us. And then we get the fruits of the Spirit here coming, starting in verse 22, of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And in that, then we are able to reflect the spirit of who God is calling us to be. And as I am going through this type of stuff up where I live, those are the traits that are honestly coming through people the most, is verses 22 and 23. The gospel text this week is out of Luke chapter 9, verses 51 to 62. This is where Jesus is continuing to head forward, and there's been some rejection. And Jesus then gets kind of asked by James and John, should we condemn them? What is it? And Jesus says, no, that's not the way. So then finally you get someone who's saying, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus responds in verse 58, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And then we get the hard moment here of verse 59, where someone says, I want to follow, but let me first bury my father. And Jesus responds with, let the dead bury their own dead. But as you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. And Jesus then kind of responds here to another who, let me first say farewell to people. Coming in verse 61, Jesus responds with, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. This recognition of how Jesus is trying to move us forward is palpable here. And I think it's an important thing that we'll talk a little bit about here this week. But before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do a shameless plug. Working Preacher, if you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it between the Sermon Brainwaves podcasts or commentaries or discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, ways to be thinking about these texts. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Civic Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week, but also they have the liturgical art, colors, prayers, hymns, and daily devotions. As we have talked about before, with this being in this after Pentecost season, it's so important for us to continue to move forward in our faith and continuing to be in this place of growth. And there's no better way to be able to do that than making sure that you're doing some of these daily devotions and making sure that you are taking that into accord. So if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Civic Library, I'd highly recommend that becoming part of your daily or weekly routine. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter covering a wide variety of ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be brought into your weekly lectionary preaching, or being able to just bring up some new and different ways and events and ideas on how to become a little bit more environmentally friendly. If you enjoy listening to this podcast for a half an hour each week, I know you're going to enjoy the resources over at Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. That'll be the first link down in the show notes. No one who puts their hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. What is that actually saying? Remember, we're dealing with a largely agrarian culture at this time. There's a lot of farmers. And what is Jesus actually saying? You can't be a farmer? I don't think that's exactly what Jesus is getting at. What I'd argue is what Jesus is stating is, I have called you for more. Do not get comfortable with where you are. And I think when we actually look at our own physical body construction, I think we can actually see that ourselves. If you think about a lot of animals out that we see outside of birds, we are one of the only ones that primarily is bipedal, or essentially walks on two legs versus four. And there is advantages to this and disadvantages to this. Yes, we are maybe not as fast for short bursts as something like a cheetah, but it also has given us the ability that we are one of the best endurance animals on the face of the planet. If we think about just our body's construction, our ear canals allow for balance as we are running. Our eyes adjust to the up and down movement easily. We have short arms and thin ankles that cut through and are able to swing back and forth as we run. Our wide shoulders, thin waist, and narrow pelvis allow us to counteract the rotation that we are creating when running. We have sweat glands that allow us to be able to not just pant like a dog or many other animals, but allowing us to actually cool ourselves down, along with having less body hair to keep in warmth, and also having tall, thin bodies overall that allow us to be able to disperse that heat quite a ways. We have blood flow that pulls that heat out of our brain to be able to cool us down. We have a large gluteus maximus or butt to be able to have power generation, but also it is theorized that that is why we don't need a tail to allow for us to balance as we walk or run. We have these large surface area joints like our hips, knees, and ankles that are able to absorb that compounding as we are running. We have feet that slowly expand again as another type of shock absorber, and it allows for us to be able to utilize the elasticity within our tendons and muscles to actually use some kinetic energy as we move forward as we are running. And that's just the biological aspect. If we get into the chemical biology, we have ATP, which is the energy that our body creates. And what's super cool is this adenosine with 3 phosphates is broken down by water to produce just a little bit amount of energy with that breaking of that bond. And that is what allows us to start. But our energy systems are multiple. We have a phosphogenic system, which is our initial burst. It's the amount of energy storage that each of our cells, each of our mitochondria naturally have just in reserve, ready to go. And we burn that off in usually less than 10 seconds of us saying we start running or something of that nature. So then we move into a creatine phosphate system, which allows us to have, again, this limited amount of phosphates through creatine. And again, this burns off in about 10 seconds. So a lot of our world-class sprinters, this is basically what they are burning. But then we move into anaerobic glycolysis. This is where we start taking sugars and breaking them down for energy. And so when we start this anaerobic process, it's a quick process of breaking the sugars and being able to get exactly 2 for 2. We're able to break the sugar down. It provides the ATP that we're needing to keep going. But the byproduct helps produce lactate, which if you've ever experienced that, it's literally the process of your muscles becoming more acidic. And that's where we start getting the pain. That's where we start getting tired. And thus we aren't able to keep going. The process that we're all striving for as we get into these longer and longer distance is aerobic glycolysis. And this is where we actually start bringing oxygen into the system. And yes, it is more energy intensive, but out of that one sugar, we are able to get 18 times more ATP by moving into the Krebs cycle. And in doing that, it actually burns more cleanly. We don't get the byproducts that lead to the lactate. It allows for our body to actually be taking that energy and becoming the most efficient that we possibly can. And that is how our body is designed. But the question then becomes is why are some of us better at it than others? Well, let's think about this. If you were an athlete of some nature in an earlier time in your life, are you still able to go back onto the court, pitch, field, and do what you used to do? I know for me, if I was asked to go and play basketball like I did when I was in high school, I do okay, but I definitely am not the same athlete. My body isn't trained in the same way to be able to do that. I'm not going to do as well. And part of that is for that sport, my VO2 max isn't as good. My body taking in the oxygen to be able to do this anaerobic glycolysis, being able to bring in the oxygen to help produce this energy, I end up hitting my lactate threshold earlier, which is where the amount of oxygen that I'm taking in and it's still being able to produce enough energy so that my body can keep going. It's not getting that lactate. It's not needing to go into the anaerobic process. I'm not demanding so much that we have to go to these quick solutions, that I'm able to stay in this process. And that's where the VO2 max is so important, especially as we're younger, so that when we age and that goes down, we have more room to work with. I've been thinking about this a little bit because my wife and I are training for a half marathon at the end of the summer. And I ran in high school, but it's been reestablishing some of these things to be able to get my body back toward where it was. Accepting that I'm not necessarily the same athlete that I was. I'm older now and there's different things that I'm dealing with, but also still seeing how much my body is able to do. But if you also talk to anybody who does distance running, we're talking your half marathon, your full marathon, your ultra marathons, your triathlon athletes. It's not just the training aspect of it. It's the training of the mind that you have to do. It's being able to get to this place where, yes, something and I'm experiencing something, but recognizing that it's okay, I can keep going. Recognizing the difference between pain and being hurt. Recognizing the difference on, okay, my body's going through this, but I have a gel or I have something, a Gatorade or something along to be able to help my body with this and being able to keep going. This week we have a lot of call stories and talking into what does it mean, but then what is Jesus actually really getting at here? What I would argue that Jesus is really getting at is the idea that he is the ultimate distance runner athlete, undefeated, can keep going at incredible paces that we can't imagine for incredible distances that we can't imagine. But he's also stating you are so capable of so many things that you don't recognize, but you hold yourself back. You aren't putting in the training to be able to get to the places where I want you to be. And so thus I can't call you into them because you haven't done the training. I need you to get out of your comfort so that we can train you to move into where I'm wanting you to be. Much like when, if you are a younger athlete or even someone who is a musician, much like you run scales or do rudiments or work on pieces so that when you get to that performance, it's easy. Or that it gets to the next level so that you can continue to take on challenging and more challenging items. Being able to keep working things so that your body becomes accustomed to the different dribble moves or the distances that you're running, or being able to work your forehand to be able to create the topspin that you've been working on consistently where it becomes automatic. Our faith is something that we need to keep growing, as we've been talking about, especially that we are in this after Pentecost green season of growth. Then we have to be okay with leaving what our comfort is to continue to challenge ourselves to go forward. To not only work the physical muscles that we are needing to work, but the mental muscles as well. To be able to be in the right mental space to keep going even when it becomes difficult. One of the things that I recognize with the community that I am in is Bemidji has gone through difficult things, and there is enough people there and enough support systems that we will figure out a way to get through it. And is there going to be hard days? Yes. Is there going to be times where we break down and wish it had never happened? Yes. But we have to keep moving forward. We have to recognize that we can't just go back to what it was. We can't just stay stagnant to where we are. We have to allow ourselves to keep moving forward. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to be okay with venturing into the unknown. Just like if you've done the training for a big race, but then you start feeling different pains or whatever, knowing the difference between whether or not to keep pushing or, okay, I just need to slow down a little bit and I'm going to be okay. We understand this when we talk about it from an athletic standpoint. But when we start looking at it in our day-to-day lives sometimes, or we start looking at it from a faith perspective, it's really easy for us to put up these different obstacles in the way. It's not that Jesus isn't wanting us to go and mourn and spend time with people who have passed away. It's that sometimes it's really easy for that also to become a distraction from us to ever get out and work and do the things that we're wanting to do. Do the things that God is calling us into doing. Doing those training runs that we don't necessarily always want to do. I know for me, there's plenty of times when a training run comes up, I'm not looking forward necessarily to doing it, but I'm glad when I'm done it. And I know that when I get to that race day and I've done all that training and my body is able to do it, that will be an amazing feeling I'll be very excited. The work is worth the reward at the end. Are we doing the same thing within our faith? Are we allowing ourselves to continue to move forward in the ways that we need to move forward? So the question I have for you this week is, where are you getting out of your comfort zone in your faith? Where are you getting out of your comfort zone in your faith? I think this is a moment then that allows for us to explore ourselves and know the innermost parts of ourselves as we get challenged. It's one of the things that distance runners talk about is there's no better way to get to know yourself and what you're truly made of than putting yourself into some of those races and having to mentally fight through it. It's also one of those moments too where if we're trying to figure out what our next calling is, it's sometimes putting ourselves out there and seeing what happens. It allows us to see the different skills and abilities we didn't know we had at different ages. If we're still living and breathing, we still have reasons to be here, and God still sees us as being a useful vessel here. So then let's utilize that gift. God doesn't want us to lose and take steps back in the training of where God is trying to move us. So we have to keep going out and training, whether we're seeing where the end is or not. So that we recognize, like a good coach, that they are preparing us for a situation that they know is coming, and we just don't know when. So that when we get to that moment, when we get to that place, we are prepared. Our body knows how to shift from the anaerobic to the aerobic and be able to produce so much more energy to keep going, even when the body may be screaming to stop. To have the mental fortitude to be able to say, I just got to tell it to relax. It's going to be okay. I know we can do this. We're not hurt. You're just angry today. Let's go. I know I can get around this guy with this dribble move. I've worked it thousands of times. I know that I've been working on my forehand to be able to get that top spin that I've been looking for so many times. It is time to pull it out, and you don't even think about it, and boom, it happened. We are trying to, within our faith life, within our day-to-day lives, be able to do that. And this again reiterates to me why the season after Pentecost is so important. And it's so easy for us to overlook, but it's vital for us. God is calling us into training. God is calling us into the gym, into those training runs. Are we going to respond? Or are we going to recognize that then if we don't, that it either means more training to get to God, to where God is wanting us to be, or God has to divert what was intended for us to a different path, and it's going to be a longer path to get there because we aren't ready for it. I think that's one of the things that we have to do. And sometimes that means, I think, especially like with what I'm seeing around me, that we have to lend a hand to help others so that we all can move to where God is calling us next. So we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.